What happens when a beloved television personality walks into a lion's den unprepared for the savagery that awaits? What happens when civility crumbles and a simple interview turns into an all-out war on live television? In just 46 seconds, a single comment would ignite an inferno that would consume the entire panel, leaving viewers stunned and one host's reputation in absolute tatters. The studio lights were hot that afternoon. Jeremy Clarkson settled into the plush purple chair on the Loose Women set, a space he had visited before, but never quite like this. The audience applauded warmly as he took his seat, his familiar grin spreading across his face. He was there to talk about his new book, a straightforward promotional appearance that should have been easy, breezy, and over in 15 minutes. The makeup artist had just finished touching up his face, moments before. The floor manager had given him a thumbs up. Everything seemed normal. Everything seemed fine. But there was something in the air, a tension that Jeremy couldn't quite place. He noticed Denise looking at him from across the table, her expression unreadable. Not friendly, but not openly hostile either. Just watching, waiting. The theme music played. The cameras went live. The red lights blinked on. Denise Welch sat at the head of the table, flanked by Nadia Sawalha, Kay Adams, and Janet Street Porter. The cameras rolled. The show began. Denise welcomed the viewers at home with her usual bright energy, but there was an edge to it that Jeremy immediately picked up on. She introduced him with a smile, but the words felt loaded, almost sarcastic. And joining us today is a man who never fails to have an opinion on absolutely everything, the one and only Jeremy Clarkson. The audience clapped politely. Jeremy waved. He tried to keep things light. Well, thank you for having me, ladies. It's always a pleasure to be surrounded by such strong opinions. I feel right at home. The other panelists chuckled. Nadia smiled warmly. Kay nodded. Janet gave him a knowing look, but Denise didn't laugh. She just stared at him, her smile tight and controlled. Denise leaned forward with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She opened with what seemed like a harmless question, but the way she delivered it carried weight. So Jeremy, lovely to have you here. Before we get into the book, I have to ask, and I think a lot of people watching would want to know this. Do you ever stop to think about how your opinions affect people? Like, really think about it? Jeremy chuckled, clearly thinking this was playful banter, the kind of back and forth he had navigated 1,000 times before. Well, Denise, I like to think my opinions make people think. That's the point, isn't it? To start conversations, to challenge ideas, to not just accept everything we're told. Denise's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing just slightly. Start conversations or start arguments. Because it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that you enjoy being controversial for the sake of it. Like you wake up in the morning and think, what can I say today to upset people? The audience shifted in their seats. This was already sharper than expected. The tone had changed in an instant, going from light introduction to pointed interrogation. Jeremy's smile faded slightly, but he kept his composure. I enjoy being honest, Denise. Not everyone agrees with me, and that's absolutely fine. That's democracy. That's free speech. But I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not just to make people comfortable. If my honesty makes you uncomfortable, well, that's something you have to deal with, not me. Right, Denise said, her voice dripping with sarcasm now, each word carefully enunciated. Because honesty is what we call it when someone says offensive things and then hides behind free speech. It's what we call it when you insult people, demean them, mock them, and then claim it's all just your opinion and everyone else is too sensitive. That's not honesty, Jeremy. That's cowardice dressed up as bravery. The studio fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the camera operators looked uncomfortable, glancing at each other with wide eyes. This had escalated far beyond what anyone had expected. Jeremy's eyebrows rose. His jaw tightened. I'm sorry. Are we having a conversation, or are you interrogating me? Because I thought I was invited here to discuss my book, not to be put on trial for thought crimes. Denise leaned back, crossing her arms defensively. Oh, here we go. The victim card. You can dish it out, but you can't take it. Is that it? I can take criticism just fine, Jeremy shot back, his voice rising slightly. What I can't take is being ambushed on live television by someone who clearly has an axe to grind. Nadia jumped in quickly, her voice gentle but firm, trying desperately to smooth things over before they got completely out of hand. I think what Denise is trying to say, and maybe she's not saying it in the best way, but I think what she's getting at is that words have power, Jeremy. Real power. And when you have a platform as big as yours, when millions of people listen to what you say and respect your opinion, maybe there's a responsibility that comes with that, a duty to think before you speak. Jeremy turned to Nadia, his expression softening slightly. At least she was approaching this with some semblance of reason. I absolutely agree that words have power, Nadia. I really do. I've spent my entire career working with words, crafting them, using them to entertain and inform. But I also think that people have the power to choose what they listen to, what they watch, even what they read. If you don't like what I say, you don't have to watch my shows, read my columns, or buy my books. There are thousands of other voices out there. Choose someone else. Denise scoffed loudly, the sound echoing through the studio. Oh, how convenient for you. How incredibly convenient. So you can say whatever you want, hurt whoever you want, damage whoever you want, and then just tell people to look away if they don't like it. That's not taking responsibility, Jeremy. That's running from it. That's cowardice. Pure and simple. That's what cowards do. The audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row covered their mouths in shock. This was unprecedented. Hosts didn't speak to guests this way. Not on daytime television. Not anywhere. Jeremy's jaw tightened visibly. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair. You bought cowardice? You're calling me a coward. Me? The person sitting here answering your hostile questions instead of walking out, which is what I should probably do? Yes, I am calling you a coward, Denise shot back without a moment's hesitation, her voice filled with conviction and anger. A real brave person, a truly brave person, would listen to criticism with an open mind. They would reflect on their words and their impact. They would think about the people they've hurt. And maybe, just maybe, they would admit when they've gone too far. But you never do that. You never admit fault. You double down every single time. You make it worse. You turn yourself into the victim when you're the one causing the harm. Kay Adams, who had been watching this unfold with increasing concern, finally felt compelled to speak. Her voice was measured, diplomatic, trying to pull things back from the brink. Jeremy, look, I think we all just want to understand where you're coming from. Some of the things you've said over the years, they've genuinely upset people. Good people. People who felt targeted or mocked or belittled. Don't you think there's value in acknowledging that? Jeremy turned to Kay, his expression earnest. Kay, I appreciate that you're asking me this in a civil way, unlike some people at this table. And yes, I acknowledge that I've upset people. I've acknowledged it many times. I've apologized when I've crossed a line, when I've said something that went too far. But what I won't do, what I refuse to do, is apologize for having opinions that differ from yours or anyone else's. I won't apologize for being who I am. That's where I draw the line. Denise laughed, a harsh, mocking sound that cut through the air like a knife. Apologized? You've been forced to apologize, Jeremy. Forced. There's a massive difference. You only say sorry when your job is on the line, when the lawyers get involved, when the public outcry gets too loud to ignore. That's not genuine remorse. That's damage control. That's saving your own skin. That's absolutely not true, Jeremy said, his voice rising now, the the frustration and anger finally breaking through his composed exterior. You don't know me, Denise. You don't know what conversations I have behind closed doors. You don't know how I reflect on things in my private moments. You don't know the letters I've written, the calls I've made, the genuine soul-searching I've done. You know the public persona. You know the character. You don't know the man. Oh, I think we all know you pretty well, Jeremy, Denise said with a smirk that was equal parts contempt and satisfaction. We've watched you for years, decades. We've seen the pattern. We've watched the same cycle repeat itself over and over and over again. You say something outrageous. People get upset. You either ignore it or double down. Eventually, when the heat gets too intense, you issue some half-hearted apology. And then, a few months later, you do it all over again. We know exactly who you are. You've shown us. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every moment of this spectacular implosion. The producers in the control room were frantically trying to decide whether to go to commercial or let this play out. The ratings would be incredible. But the fallout could be catastrophic. Janet Street Porter, who had been silent until now, watching this train wreck unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror, suddenly spoke up. Her voice was loud, cutting through the tension like a thunderclap. Denise, stop. Just stop. Let him talk. This is getting ridiculous. This isn't what we do. This isn't who we are. Denise whipped her head toward Janet so fast it was almost violent. Her eyes were wild, her face flushed red with anger and adrenaline. Excuse me? Excuse me? I'm doing my job as a host. I'm asking the hard questions. The questions that need to be asked. The questions that everyone else is too afraid or too polite to ask. I'm holding power to account. No, you're not, Janet replied bluntly, shaking her head with disgust. You're not holding anyone to account. You're grandstanding. You invited him here with a clear agenda. You wanted to ambush him on live television. You wanted this confrontation. And it's uncomfortable to watch. It's embarrassing. For you. For us. For everyone watching at home. The audience murmured loudly now. People were shifting in their seats, leaning forward, whispering to each other. This had gone from uncomfortable to unbearable. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Denise's face flushed even redder. She looked like she might explode. I cannot believe you're defending him right now. I cannot believe that you, of all people, are sitting here defending him after everything he's said and done over the years. The jokes, the insults, the casual cruelty. And you're defending him? Janet shrugged, completely unbothered by Denise's outburst. I'm not defending him, Denise. I'm not defending anything he's said or done. What I am doing is pointing out that you're being unfair. There's a way to challenge someone, to ask tough questions, to hold them accountable without being aggressive and hostile. This isn't it. This is something else entirely. Denise turned back to Jeremy, her eyes blazing with an intensity that bordered on fanatical. You know what your problem is, Jeremy? You know what really gets under my skin about you? You think you're untouchable. You genuinely believe that you can waltz in here, flash that smile, charm everyone with your wit and your stories, and we'll all just forget. We'll all just overlook the harm you've caused, the pain you've inflicted, the careers you've damaged. You think you're above it all. Jeremy held up his hands, a gesture of both defense and frustration. Denise, please listen to me. I don't think I'm untouchable. I really don't. I know I've made mistakes. Big ones. I know I've hurt people. I'm not proud of everything I've said and done over the years. But this, what you're doing right now, this isn't journalism. This isn't a fair interview. This isn't even a proper debate. This is a personal attack. This is a character assassination. And I won't sit here and be treated like this. A personal attack? Denise repeated incredulously, her voice dripping with disbelief and mockery. You want to talk about personal attacks? You? The man who's built an entire career on personal attacks? How about the columns you've written, tearing people apart for sport? How about the jokes you've made at other people's expense, knowing full well they'd read them, knowing they'd hurt? How about the careers you've mocked, the people you've belittled, the individuals you've made feel small just so you could feel big? And now you want to cry about being attacked? The irony is almost too much to bear. Nadia tried again to intervene, her voice almost pleading now. Okay, let's all take a breath here. Everyone, this is getting way too heated. We need to step back. We need to calm down. This isn't helping anyone. No, Nadia, Denise said sharply, cutting her off with a wave of her hand. I'm not taking a breath. I'm not stepping back. I'm not calming down. I'm tired. I'm so tired of men like him getting away with whatever they want, saying whatever they want, doing whatever they want, while the rest of us have to tiptoe around their egos, apologize for existing, make ourselves small so they can feel big. I'm done with it. I'm done. Jeremy stood up abruptly. The movement was so sudden, so unexpected, that everyone froze. The entire studio went silent. Even the crew members stopped what they were doing. Time seemed to slow down. He looked directly at Denise, his voice calm now, but cutting, each word delivered with precision and weight. Men like me? You keep saying men like me. You don't know anything about me. You've made up your mind before I even sat down in this chair. You decided who I was, what I represented, and what narrative you wanted to push. This isn't an interview. This was never going to be an interview. This is a hit job, a setup, a public execution disguised as journalism. Denise stood too, refusing to back down even now, her pride and anger preventing her from seeing how badly this had spiraled out of control. If you can't handle tough questions, Jeremy, if you can't sit here and face legitimate criticism, then maybe you should stick to talking about cars. Maybe you should stick to what you know and stop pretending you're some kind of intellectual heavyweight who can comment on serious issues. That was it. That was the moment. That was the comment that sealed everything. Jeremy's face went cold. His eyes hardened. The genial television personality was gone, replaced by something steely and resolute. You know what, Denise? I've been on hundreds of shows. Thousands, probably. I've been grilled by the best journalists in the business. I've faced hostile audiences. I've dealt with difficult questions. But I've never, and I mean never in my entire career, been treated with such blatant disrespect. You're not a journalist. You're a bully with a microphone, and I won't sit here another second and validate this circus. The audience erupted in shocked whispers. Kay Adams looked mortified. Nadia covered her mouth. Janet nodded slightly, as if she agreed. Denise's eyes narrowed. Get out then. If you can't handle this, get out. Gladly, Jeremy said. He reached down, grabbed his microphone pack, and started removing it. His hands moved quickly, efficiently. There was no hesitation. Kay tried desperately to salvage the situation. Jeremy, please, let's talk this through. Jeremy shook his head. There's nothing to talk through, Kay. I was invited here under false pretenses. This was never going to be a fair conversation. Denise crossed her arms, her voice dripping with venom. Oh, poor Jeremy. Can't take the heat, so he runs away. How very typical. Jeremy paused, the microphone pack now in his hand. He looked at her one last time. You wanted a moment, Denise. You wanted to make a name for yourself by taking me down on live television. Congratulations. You've shown everyone exactly who you are. He turned to the other panelists. Nadia, Kay, Janet, it was lovely to see you. I'm sorry it ended this way. And with that, Jeremy Clarkson walked off the set. The cameras kept rolling. The audience sat in stunned silence. No one knew what to say. Denise stood there, her face a mask of fury and something else. something that looked almost like panic. She had pushed too hard, and everyone knew it. Nadia finally broke the silence. Well, that was something. Kay looked at Denise. I think you went too far. Denise's voice was defensive now, the aggression replaced by a desperate need to justify herself. Too far? He's the one who couldn't handle a few questions. Those weren't questions, Janet said flatly. That was an attack, and you know it. The producer's voice crackled in their earpieces, telling them to go to commercial. The cameras cut. The lights dimmed slightly. Denise sat back down, but she looked shaken. The other women didn't speak to her. They didn't need to. The damage was done. Backstage, Jeremy was already in his dressing room, gathering his things. A production assistant knocked timidly on the door. Mr. Clarkson, are you okay? Jeremy smiled at her, a genuine smile this time. I'm fine, love. I'm just glad to be out of there. That was crazy, she said. I've never seen anything like that. Jeremy shrugged. Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself. I wasn't going to sit there and be insulted. Back on set, the show returned from commercial. Denise tried to regain control, but her energy was different now. Rattled, uncertain. So, Denise began, clearing her throat, as you all saw, Jeremy has decided to leave. I suppose that says everything we need to know about him. Janet couldn't help herself. Or it says something about how he was treated. Denise glared at her. Janet, whose side are you on? I'm not on anyone's side, Janet replied calmly. I'm just calling it like I see it. You were aggressive. He responded. He left. That's what happened. Nadia nodded slowly. I have to agree. I think we could have handled that differently. Denise's face turned red again. Unbelievable. I'm trying to hold someone accountable, and you're all acting like I'm the villain. Kay spoke gently. Denise, accountability is important, but so is respect, and I don't think he felt respected. The audience was completely silent now. They had watched the entire meltdown, and the mood in the studio was heavy, uncomfortable. Denise tried to move on, to change the subject, but it was too late. The tone had been set. The rest of the show limped along awkwardly, each segment feeling forced and hollow. When the cameras finally stopped rolling, Denise stood up without a word and walked off set. She didn't look at anyone, didn't say goodbye. She just left. The other panelists sat there for a moment, processing what had just happened. That was brutal, Nadia finally said. Janet nodded. She went in with an agenda, and it backfired. Kay sighed. I just wish it hadn't happened. We're all going to look bad now. Meanwhile, Jeremy was already in his car, heading home. His phone was buzzing with messages, calls, notifications. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. Everyone wanted his side of the story. But Jeremy didn't respond. Not yet. He just drove, letting the adrenaline fade, letting the silence settle. He knew the clips would be everywhere by the morning. He knew people would have opinions. Some would support him, some would criticize him. That was just the nature of being in the public eye. But deep down, Jeremy felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Relief. Relief that he had stood up for himself. Relief that he hadn't let Denise bully him into submission. Relief that he had walked away with his dignity intact. Because at the end of the day, that was what mattered. Not the headlines, not the hot takes, but knowing that when pushed into a corner, he had refused to be a punching bag. Back at the studio, the crew was packing up. Whispers filled the hallways. Everyone had an opinion about what they had just witnessed. One cameraman shook his head. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've never seen a host go after a guest like that. A sound technician nodded in agreement. She was out of line, way out of line. In her dressing room, Denise sat alone, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her hands were shaking slightly. The rush of adrenaline that had fueled her aggression was gone now, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. She had wanted to make a point. She had wanted to hold Jeremy accountable, but somewhere along the way, she had lost control. She had let her emotions take over. And now, sitting alone in the quiet, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had made a terrible mistake. Her phone buzzed. A text from the producer. "We need to talk." Denise closed her eyes. She knew what was coming. The questions, the scrutiny, the backlash. She had thought she was the hero of this story. She had thought she was standing up for something important. But as the reality of what had transpired began to sink in, she realized with a sinking feeling that she might have been the villain all along. The next morning, the internet exploded. Clips of the confrontation were everywhere. Twitter was on fire. News outlets were covering it. Everyone had something to say. Most of the comments were not in Denise's favor. She ambushed him. That wasn't journalism. That was a hit piece. I don't even like Jeremy Clarkson, but that was completely unfair. Denise Welch needs to apologize. She crossed a line. Jeremy, for his part, stayed quiet. He didn't release a statement. Didn't go on other shows to tell his side. He didn't need to. The footage spoke for itself. In the studio that had hosted the disaster, the producers were in crisis mode. Phone calls were made, meetings were held, damage control strategies were discussed. But there was no denying what had happened. On live television, in front of millions of viewers, Denise Welch had let her personal feelings cloud her judgment. She had turned what should have been a simple interview into a hostile interrogation. And when her guest had finally had enough and walked away, she had made things worse by mocking him. The other panelists were asked for their thoughts. Janet gave a brief statement. "I think emotions ran high. I wish it had gone differently." Nadia was more direct. "I felt uncomfortable watching it happen. I think we all did." Kay was diplomatic. "These things happen on live television. I hope everyone involved can move forward." But moving forward was easier said than done. The clip continued to circulate. Think pieces were written. Debates raged on social media. And through it all, one thing became abundantly clear. In her attempt to take down Jeremy Clarkson, Denise Welch had only succeeded in exposing her own failings. She had shown the world that beneath the confident exterior, beneath the righteous indignation, was someone who couldn't separate personal bias from professional responsibility. Jeremy, on the other hand, had walked away with his head held high. He hadn't stooped to her level. He hadn't shouted, or sworn, or made a scene. He had simply stated the truth, removed his microphone, and left. It was a masterclass in dignity under pressure, and people respected him for it. Days turned into weeks. The fervor eventually died down, as these things always do. But the memory of that interview lingered. For Jeremy, it became just another story in a long career filled with controversies and comebacks. He had faced worse. He would face worse again. But he had proven, once more, that he wouldn't be pushed around. For Denise, it was a different story. The backlash stung. The criticism hurt. And deep down, in the quiet moments when the cameras weren't rolling and the microphones were off, she couldn't help but wonder if she had been wrong. But pride is a powerful thing, and admitting fault, especially on such a public stage, felt impossible. So she doubled down. She defended herself in interviews. She insisted she had been right to challenge him. She painted herself as the victim of a coordinated campaign to discredit her. But the people who had watched the interview knew better. They had seen it with their own eyes. They had heard the venom in her voice. They had witnessed the moment when a host forgot that her job was to facilitate conversation, not dominate it. And in the end, that was the real tragedy of the whole affair. Not that Jeremy Clarkson had walked off a talk show. That was almost expected, given his history. No, the real tragedy was that Denise Welch had been given a platform, a microphone, and a guest, and she had squandered it all in pursuit of a personal vendetta. She had wanted to be remembered for holding someone accountable. Instead, she would be remembered for the day she lost control, crossed the line, and drove a guest off her own show. Because sometimes the villain of the story isn't the person everyone expects. Sometimes it's the person who thinks they're the hero.